Welcome to yet another half-baked attempt to take my content outside of just remixing, or to an extent remaking, things. By the time this video is silently added, it will be February 1st, 2025, the third anniversary of this channel. As always, I am forever grateful to all who had commented on, rated, or indeed even viewed, my videos. Although some of you had tendencies to leave cryptic messages, which I didn't bother with seeking clarification for, your activity was very valuable regardless, as it gives me a rough idea as to which remixes generated healthy discussion and/or were preferred out of a wide selection of genres I imitate, often at whim. Apparently, you guys like it a lot when I make 8-bit and Eurodisco. But there's also this urge to rush out something in time to take advantage of a certain trendy song, and because I never want to be too committed to YouTube nor to music, I'm presently in a pressure cooker. If you recall, the number of new compositions posted in 2023, that is, not counting instrumentals, remasters, remakes, etc., was 13. This year, the tally was 15. How I managed to increase my output for this year, I have zero idea. Maybe because some 2023 ideas bled into 2024 and 8-bit had inflated the number significantly. On average, the time I spent on each remix before release has generally increased, but sometimes I could sit on an unfinished project for literal weeks just to have it come out sounding like it was thrown together in 3 hours. This dramatic seriousness also goes against the founding vision of the channel, to poke fun at my sister's obsessions, now expanded to the obsessions of my friend circle. But I digress. I can't even stand much of my past work. The only thing I can do is to soldier on, hoping that my next remix would get things right. So let's see what I did not think I got right during this year, in the form of song demos. These demos eased my initial dopamine rush and allowed areas for improvement to be easily identified. I listened to them extensively on my uneventful commutes and wrote down any desired changes. Note that not all demos will be included here, only those with noticeable enough differences to discuss. And when I name drop a song, I'm referring to my take on it instead of the original, unless I use the phrase source material, but sometimes I don't use that phrase. Confused enough yet? With that, let's begin. This demo was made in late December 2023, but since the video for Bite Me came out in 2024, its demo goes in this year's unreleased content compilation. I had sufficiently thought out a lot of details before getting to work, so the melody remained basically unchanged. The difference is in the detail. Since this was a rough sketch, many refinements were not added yet. The breathing sound, for example, was added after this demo was saved, in a bid to make it more faithful to the 90s boy band and Britney Spears sound that I was trying, keyword trying, to replicate. The third chorus was not added yet, so this demo abruptly stops after the dance break, roughly aligning with the duration of the source material. This demo was saved after just 2 or 3 hours of work, though I had mentally designated instruments and notes for days prior. With the exception of the snare, there were no loops. The pitch bends and the leading synth had not been added. The faint backing melody for the verse and the synth bells were absent. I had only finished arranging up to the end of the second chorus, which makes this demo about 2.5 minutes long. The lead synth melody was going to reappear after the second chorus, for a total initial song length of about 4 minutes and 15 seconds, but I cut it because of redundancy. The song ended up being just under 4 minutes without the added instrumental break, and I guess that's an acceptable length. Due to this adaptation's novelty, I was quite high on good thoughts, so I saved this work in progress as a little preview of sorts. I hadn't finished the second verse or the bridge when this was saved, so it is less than 2 minutes long. The DPCM opening lines had not been added by this point. And the triangle that accentuates the snare drum had been pitched up in further revisions. The snare sounds weaker in this demo compared to the final. The synth solo before the chorus was also replaced by a generic-sounding bassline until I could decide on a channel to play said solo. Said solo would be assigned to the triangle wave in the final product. Having focused mainly on finalizing the arrangement, I did not use loops in the intro. The leading riff sounded thinner because I had not duplicated my notes to cover more octaves. Several more riffs and runs are missing. There was only one electric guitar track instead of two in the final. Transitions between verses, chords, and choruses were minimal, with only the toms to add tension. The synth bells were used extensively on the Eve Psyche remix, but were not present in the demo. I also figured out a way to make it sound a little bit faster, simply by shortening the root notes of the bass line. This was not implemented in the demo, which makes it sound rather flat and not fast. Not that the final felt fast enough anyway. The end fade-out was not added yet, and there is no key change for the final chorus. This demo was very nearly completely erased. To this day I have absolutely no idea how I started composing Excendio later than Midas Touch, yet finished it earlier than Midas Touch. Speaking of which, this is a really early demo, made in late April, before I overhauled it in mid-May. The snare was derived from a different sample, and the toms were not added. The kick drum had not been aligned with the swing beat of the rest of the song. I still tried to stick to stock presets for the guitar, instead of using loops. The bass line for the chorus and intro extends into and throughout the verses. The background pads were changed into a choir-type sound. The pre-chorus was completely different and unfinished. There were no synth bells. A 15-second portion of the track was left blank. Most of the sound effects were not present. The few things that survived were the arrangement and the record scratching. I had briefly entertained the idea of an extended intro which would have built off the chorus chord progression in a crescendo manner, but I didn't see the point in extending an already long intro. You can also hear the original bass line, which was originally earmarked for a scrapped Attention remake. And then I realized that shoehorning in a leftover bass line for a completely unrelated reject without alteration was not necessarily the best solution. So I changed it up a bit throughout. One segment that saw little to no change, however, was the bass line for the bridge. What if I don't make a bass line quite like this ever again? This demo was made almost immediately after I thought of the main synth bell riff. Most of the faint bells in both the verses and the chorus have not been added yet. ABBA-style runs on the synth strings were absent. The synth strings also had softer attack and release that muffled the notes. After listening to the demo, I realized that the whole song didn't sound full enough, so I added the faint bells. The bass was absent from the bridge. Fun fact, I usually get a composition done to a certain level at an easier key, including this one, which was mostly finished in E minor instead of D sharp, because of the small range and strange key mapping of the musical typing interface, and then I would transpose the entire project to the correct key when exporting. So during the MIDI writing process I was hearing something more like this. I have zero idea why this remix was as well received as YouTube Studio is telling me. Maybe it's because something just clicked with viewers, or maybe I released it quickly after the source material came out. Not much had been done with the synth bells, which in the final release complement the vocals like so. At this stage, the kick drum had not been tailored to complement the instrumental break, and most of the stuff was directly duplicated from the opening section. I fixed everything 3 days later and called it quits. This is what happens when you space designer everything and leave the drums on full volume. Listening to it over my phone caused me physical pain, so I split the snare into its own track and applied a gated reverb to achieve the drawn-out hit that you hear in the final, now made audible by Logic's stem splitter. This demo also did not make use of the humanize function, because I wanted to finalize the arrangements beforehand. I had not introduced any variation on the hi-hats in the chorus, and it sounded like the verses and intro. The rap segment was also missing instruments. The song was originally going to fade out at the end instead of having a full conclusion. I added the concluding bars because I wanted the song to be over 4 minutes, and also because I had briefly considered that exact sequence in a possible extended mix of Wadada which didn't go through. This is why I kept alluding to the arrangement being based on scrapped ideas. Sometimes I wonder what could have been if I threw in some rock guitars. Speaking of rock, here's a really early version of Queen Card's remake. I was more faithful to the original here. The original of course referring to the first version posted in June 2023. I hadn't even added the sync lead, much less the melodic hook, which the original version lacked because I was too reliant on the bass to carry the whole song. You can also hear the draft bass line I put down for the pre-chorus, which was a direct copy of the old one. Of course, the new pre-chorus turned out super different to keep the energy consistent throughout. Homologation was the word of the year for me, because not all of the ideas I have can be translated into 3 to 4 minute songs. What makes the upcoming slate of scrapped projects different from the all-too-common passing idea is that these were far enough into development to have individual project files created for them, which sit at various degrees of completion. This was made in conjunction with Magnetic 2A03 and carried over much of the same techniques. Not much to say about this one other than the fact that I procrastinated on it big time, and by the time I tried to finish it the source material had already fallen out of relevance, so I didn't bother. If I had finished this, it was going to sound similar to the Bite Me remix, though I wasn't going to deviate significantly from the source material, so it would have become much more of a cover anyway. I have some ideas jotted down that I might eventually implement, and only then will I declare it finished. As of now, the chorus sounds like this. Before Midas Touch, there was Sneakers. I had big plans for this one, including but not limited to strong-arming it into a new key signature, adding new chords and going full funk on the guitars. I stopped brainstorming when I discovered that Midas Touch was a good alternative, and I wanted the swing beat. So I moved most of the musical ideas intended for Sneakers to Midas Touch, and used up the remainder for Klaxon. All that remains now is the drum set sequence, which used the kit from You and Me. From the drum set alone you knew that this remix was doomed right from its conception. And the key signature upheaval was eventually implemented in How Sweet. For now, the closest thing to this scrapped project is the Klaxon remix, so listening to that will give you a pretty good idea of what the Sneakers remix would sound like if completed. While we're still on the subject of danceable music, let me present a half-finished take on Strategy, a spiritual refinement of Midas Touch. It would have been the first time I used the Logic 11 bass guitar in a published work, but I had zero idea what to do with the rap segment. This work in progress pumped out some parts that I personally liked, like the key change at the end, and I envision it as a finished work occasionally, but as of now I still need to figure things out. Maybe I'll come back to it someday, but let's face it, I can't play guitar to save my life. So the chances are slim. I did, however, use many techniques and new instruments from here for the Queen card remake. Some people I know are really obsessed with Kiss of Life, which is how I learned of this song's existence in the first place. I found that it was suitable for a possible Latin rework, and this was the result of my first hour entertaining that idea. As usual, this demo starts at the chorus, because, well, I had not thought of something to fill the verses. But it's also tuned down a semitone. I had got up to this stage until I threw in the towel and said, you know what, this rap was not going to work with that instrumental, and it wasn't worth it to try to damage control any further. And the source material ended up being pretty Latin itself anyway. These were done in mid-June as a small creative exercise, with the central concept being to remake a bunch of songs using the same set of instruments. Partly due to the guilt of beating a dead horse, I resorted to finishing both of them in very limited form for use as background music in this very video, until I finished more songs that were better suited for the dual role. Well, that's all I have for you for this edition. What can we learn from all of this? That the demos have not even helped at all, and I should increase my output frequency, but revolve my life around this channel and risk burning out? That I should give up music entirely? Or that the inherent conflict between blissful hedonism and wide reach can never be resolved unless I pick a side and stick with it? These are all questions I seek to answer as my channel continues to age. Hopefully, in a year's time, I can come back with clarity and answers to these questions. If I remain active, that is. I'm mentally disintegrating.